This incident happened in France, and the perpetrator appears to have the same temperament type as Yoo Young-chul. I'll tell you his temperament: water, fire, earth, air. These are the Soyumin, Soyangin, Taeyumin, and Taeyangin types. These four are also character divided. So even within the same fire temperament, the Soyangin type, there are Jin Soyangin with excellent character and Mang Soyangin with poor character. Yoo Young-chul falls into the Mang Soyangin category among these tough-minded temperaments, and it appears this current perpetrator is also of that type. These temperament types aren't exactly split half and half, with tender-minded and tough-minded types. Although the ratios may differ from country to country, generally the tough-minded temperament constitutes a significantly larger proportion, as shown here. In Korea, it's about this much. So I mentioned that about 1/3 are tender-minded and 2/3 are tough-minded. In France, an 11-year-old girl tragically became a victim of murder. Yes, take a good look at this girl's face. She would have been one of these four temperament types. The incident occurred on May 29th in the town of Florence in southwestern France. Yes, this is a picture of the girl. The child's name is Lihana. They say the last time she was seen alive was leaving school and getting into a car. She was found dead in an abandoned silo, 15 kilometers from where she went missing. This is the man arrested as a suspect. He's 41-year-old Jerome Barella. Now, please take a good look at his face shape. The suspect, Jerome Barella, was a maintenance worker at the school, and he was the father of one of Lihana's classmates. Yes, the suspect had been reported for child sex offenses at least 4 times. Yet it said he was never convicted even once. The incident involved an accusation of sexual assault. So it appears that last year, specifically in August, the mother of a 10-year-old girl was the one who filed that very report. She reportedly told them to interrogate the suspect. But even after opening the case file, it apparently took another 6 weeks to assign an investigator. If Varela had been summoned and prosecuted immediately back then, this kind of incident probably wouldn't have happened at all. France's president, Emmanuel Macron, reportedly criticized this judicial system's loophole. While we're discussing this, let's also examine President Emmanuel Macron's temperament type. This is from the 4 Human Types Institute blog I always refer to. This public post from April 24, 2017, discusses Macron and Le Pen's temperaments from the French election. In France, presidents can serve consecutive terms, right? So, because the presidential term is 5 years, and Macron was elected in 2017, his term of office runs until May of 2027. So that means he's now serving his second term, making it 10 years. Here, it indicates that President Macron is identified as a Taeyumin type. Taeyumin types are earth types in the tough-minded temperament. And his opponent, the candidate he competed against, Ms. Le Pen, is an air type, which falls under the tender-minded temperament. So, essentially, they possessed completely opposite temperament types. But interestingly, Le Pen is a tender-minded Taeyangin type. Tender-minded Taeyangin are typically philanthropists, and true to the meaning of tender, they usually advocate for peace. However, in stark contrast, Le Pen is depicted here as a far-right politician. So even among the same Taeyangin type, you can have warmongers and also those who are devoted to peace. Talking about a loophole in the judicial system, there was a recent incident in Korea as well, wasn't there? In the Changwon motel case, Mr. Pyo, the suspect, also had a history of sex offenses. Even with this record, the management was lax, and despite an incident occurring on that very day, he was heavily criticized for this negligence. That particular case readily comes to mind. So when such a loophole is uncovered, efforts will be made to correct it. If no similar incidents occur afterward, it will signify that the loophole has indeed been addressed and resolved. However, in Korea, things are a little different. Even when such judicial system loopholes are brought to light, the probability or frequency of similar incidents recurring tends to remain quite high. The reason is that Korea has many Soyangin types, the fire type, within the tough-minded temperaments. I've mentioned that this fire type tends to forget things quickly. Therefore, even significant incidents are quickly forgotten over time, which seems to be a contributing factor to how things unfold. Yes, it seems Gérald Darmanin is the Minister of the Interior in France, and he apparently said something. There are 3 million unprocessed complaints. Among those, sexual assault and harassment cases reach 70,000. I previously mentioned violent crimes, specifically the 4 major violent crimes including murder. Robbery, rape, and arson are the 4 major violent crimes. I've mentioned that most perpetrators in these types of crimes possess the tough-minded temperament. This is because, due to their personality, their liver and heart are often overstimulated. We commonly describe this with phrases such as having a lot of nerve or possessing a strong heart, which I believe directly reflects these inherent personality traits. This is a picture of Minister Darmanin. This presents a somewhat different picture from what we typically observe in Korea. Here, you can see individuals demonstrating, inscribing their names on a banner that displays a photograph of the tragically murdered young girl Liliana. These appear to be the local residents who lived alongside her in that very town. And it seems that people who are against these crimes have gathered together and are currently holding a solidarity protest, standing united. As a gesture of remembrance and to convey their deepest condolences, 6,000 individuals, all clad in white attire, entirely filled the space. And here, if you observe, they adorned themselves with ribbons, these sashes, which serve to symbolize the French flag, the very emblem of the French nation. When they spoke, they reportedly said something to this effect: "This is something that could have happened not only to Liliana, but also to our own families." And that's so true, isn't it? People often think, that would never happen to me, and just ignore it or stand by. But the fact is, it could happen to anyone. And unfortunately, Liliana was the one who ended up suffering. The citizens are participating in this protest, wearing Liliana's picture on signs around their necks, carrying flowers, and dressed in white. Yes, and even more, there's a person visibly present at the demonstration, actually wearing a t-shirt that has a printed photograph of Liliana on it, participating with others. Yes, among these tough-minded temperament types, the Soyangin is so prevalent in Korea, so common in our surroundings, that their characteristics are easier to understand. The suspect, Jerome Barella, is presumed to be of the tough-minded temperament, a Soyangin type. Soyangin types are very sociable. They make friends very easily. And in society, people often say they have a great personality, sincere, diligent, and friendly. They hear that a lot. The victim, young Liliana, is presumed to be a tender-minded temperament type. This is almost a formula, where if the perpetrator is a tough-minded temperament type, then the victim is highly likely to be a tender-minded temperament type, and that's due to the law of temperament conflict. To understand the law of temperament conflict better, this animal represents a tough-minded temperament type. When 2 tough-minded temperament types meet like this, the killing instinct isn't really activated as much. So it's less likely. But when a tough-minded temperament sees a tender-minded one, the killing instinct will be more triggered. It's due to that particular mechanism. Specifically, among the 2 tender-minded temperament types, she appears to be of this particular type. A very significant characteristic of this temperament is that they are extremely trusting of people and tend to view everyone positively. So, perhaps. And especially young children tend to trust and follow people more easily. Even at a young age, temperament traits are evident. This tender temperament in particular tends to see the good in people, which I believe made her even more vulnerable and susceptible to becoming a victim. We don't know if this suspect, just like Yoo Young-chul, intended to kill young Liliana from the very beginning of this unfortunate incident. We'll definitely learn more as the investigation unfolds. It's highly probable that Liliana, once abducted, didn't meekly comply, but instead screamed or resisted the abduction. So, what temperament traits come into play? Basically, this fire type Soyangin, a tough-minded temperament, possesses a highly developed sense of sight. So, because their sight is so developed, if it manifests as a strength, they could become a painter, for example. Painting is a profession that requires a very strong visual sense. So, if you look here, I'm observing that the suspect, Jerome, possesses the very same temperament type, exactly the same kind. Yoo Young-chul, a Soyangin type, also had a very developed visual sense, so he was exceptionally skilled at art. Despite not having any special or continuous training, if you observe the drawings and sketches discovered in Yoo Young-chul's home, you'd see he drew at an almost professional skill level. So, while a developed visual sense can be sublimated into something like an artist's work, conversely, if something displeases them, they possess the characteristic of wanting to eliminate it from their sight. Therefore, if Liliana continued to resist and scream, Jerome's psychological drive to eliminate her from his immediate sight would have been activated, making it highly probable that he committed the murder. This also explains why their homes can be exceptionally clean. Therefore, they just don't want to see such unpleasantness or mess directly in front of their eyes. When the police eventually went to Yoo Young-chul's studio apartment, it was reported that his place was kept remarkably clean. This means they are very good at keeping their homes tidy. That's another characteristic they possess. And then there's also... When Yoo Young-chul was apprehended, the police initially believed he couldn't possibly be the perpetrator, didn't they? He had a very neat, clean-cut appearance. These fire-type Soyangin, tough-minded temperament types, are often quite handsome. They often possess appealing looks. And as you know, there were study results indicating that when individuals are attractive, we tend to develop a preconception that they would not commit any wrongdoing. Furthermore, Yoo Young-chul didn't have any tattoos on his body, nor did he look like a gangster. Tattoos, excluding those for musicians in metal bands or artists, are typically a way for individuals to express themselves, showcasing their personality. This characteristic is often linked to the tough-minded temperament. Temperament type is the one that often gets tattoos. And so, the police initially believed that he couldn't possibly be the perpetrator. So, we can't truly know by just looking at appearances. If we're unaware of these temperament characteristics, we might overlook a criminal due to our preconceived notions and biases, allowing them to escape justice. And as I mentioned earlier, these tough-minded Soyangin individuals are incredibly amiable, make friends with ease, and adapt to any situation very quickly. I believe that's precisely why this young child was so utterly charmed, and so readily opened her heart to him. But please don't misunderstand. A large part of the population, especially in Korea, has a tough-minded temperament, and the most common temperament type is this fire type, the Soyangin. But among them, about half. Well, I said we have to distinguish between good and bad character, right? There are many people with good character. As I always say, Pope Francis and the venerable monk Byok-jong also share this same temperament type. They share Yoo Young-chul's temperament, but their character vastly differs. And among us ordinary people, who was it that rescued that woman in Japan, you know? The late Lee Soo-hyun. He had this temperament. So it really comes down to character. Just because someone is a Soyangin type, it absolutely does not mean they will become a criminal. Instead, I'm explaining these traits to you. I'm telling you this as a crime prevention coach. And as I said, their visual sense is developed, so their handwriting is excellent. Yoo Young-chul is quite renowned, isn't he, for extensively penning handwritten letters and dispatching them to journalists and the families of his victims. Their writing ability is also excellent, especially these Soyangin types. There are many among novelists. Their command of language is excellent. They're great at crafting narratives, write well, and their handwriting is very neat. And they keep the spacing between lines and letters very consistent. So at first glance you think, wow, they have great handwriting. So they actually possess many qualities that make them likable to others. Thus, when we assess someone based on typical societal criteria, it can be quite challenging to discern whether they are someone we should keep our distance from or someone we ought to embrace closely. So the most fundamental thing is that when you look at each other, you instinctively get a feeling, don't you? Their prey is different. It means they hang out in different circles. This one has its own territory, and that one has its own territory, and their prey is different. They're also active at different times. For instance, this one, while not always the case, is a temperament type that is very nocturnal. For this particular temperament, being nocturnal is quite detrimental to their health, making it another distinction. Essentially, the primary rule is for tender types to consume tender foods, and tough types to consume tough foods. That's because our eating instinct and our relationship instinct are connected. Relationship instinct is about all kinds of bonds, not just romantic. So I keep eating the opposite. I'm tender, but I keep eating tough things. Then the people I attract are also likely to be tough types. You'll just attract a lot of tough types. And for tough types, in the case of humans, we use reason to control our instincts. And since there's plenty of food, we don't just devour each other, do we? However, when they encounter the wrong person, their killing instinct might kick in, leading them to become a criminal, even a murderer, and thus ruin their life entirely, just like any tough-minded individual. So for tough types, it's vital to keep tender types at a distance and connect with other tough types, because, as I've said, the eating instinct and the relationship instinct are linked, and if you mostly consume tough types, you will inevitably attract them. Conversely, if I surround myself with tough-minded individuals, they too will be accustomed to tough foods, so my dietary habits will likely correct themselves naturally. This also greatly reduces the chances of becoming entangled in such incidents and misfortunes. And it's important not to have any anxiety in your heart, because when you're anxious, you attract more things to be anxious about. This anxiety primarily arises when parents, who are of opposing temperament types, come together. For example, let's say one parent is a tender type and the other is a tough type. Regarding your parents, if a tender-minded child is born to them, that child will likely always experience a sense of anxiety. Not a tender-minded child born to tender parents, but one like this. A tender child born to parents with opposing temperaments will inevitably experience a profound, inherent anxiety. And it's the same for a tough-minded child born to tender-minded and tough-minded parents. So it's the same in the case of Yoo Young-chul. As I mentioned earlier, there's a high probability that his parents had opposing temperament types, wasn't there? I mentioned that if his father was tender and he inherited his mother's temperament type, then he would constantly struggle with internal conflicts. Consequently, his mental anxiety level is high, making him susceptible to constantly harboring adverse energies. The most crucial aspect of rectifying this is for him to live authentically, in accordance with his inherent temperament type. So, if you are a Soyangin type, live true to that temperament. And if you understand your parents' temperament types, it becomes incredibly important for your spouse and your children, the next generation, to share your temperament type. Therefore, to correct such temperament types, dietary correction is important. And it's crucial to surround yourself with people who match your type tough-minded if you are tough, tender if you are tender. But if you've already failed, marrying an opposite type was a mistake. The children born into such circumstances are bound to experience considerable distress. Therefore, it solely falls upon these children to swiftly shed and cleanse themselves of that gloomy, negative energy, which originates from having parents with opposing temperament types. You can't just claim, my parents' opposite types doom me to unhappiness. One can't live like that. And it's actually very common for parents to have opposite temperament types. So the best approach is to educate on temperament types from a young age. The more such cases you encounter, the more adept you become at recognizing these types. That's why I strongly believe it's very important to educate even young children about these specific temperament types. Whether it's France or other parts of Europe, tender-minded foods are likely well developed. Of course, there might be exceptions. And this particular food is very popular, so there are probably many alcoholic beverages made from it as well. But food doesn't just control our physical bodies, it also governs our minds. So, while this is a food suited for tender-minded types, the alcohol itself is not. Therefore, please consume it carefully, and tender-minded individuals always be mindful of coffee, as I frequently advise. Indeed, Earth hosts countless foods. Roughly half cater to tender-minded types, while the other half are for tough-minded individuals. So, you really ought to delve into studying these different food categories. Yes, I pray for the peaceful repose of our victim, young Rihanna, and I also extend my deepest condolences to her family. And for Jerome Barella, who has been identified as the suspect, I earnestly hope he receives the appropriate punishment that perfectly aligns with the heinous crime he committed and that justice is fully served. That concludes this video. Thank you.